Welcome back to the tutorial of creating a web app in Java with Servlets, JSP, and MySql. And in the first part of the second part, just the previous video, I created a schema in MySql, and I can just show it here. So I created a schema called web app tutorial. I created a table called users, and then I dropped in a few users. I can show it here. Yes. And so then the next part of the plan is I want to make sure that I can connect to the database from Java. So I need to install a JDBC connector file, and in the prerequisites I put in a link here where you can actually download it. So if I go to this page and I move to the MySql database, you can just find the connector here, and you might actually download it by clicking this file here, and just start my download. And it's not a very big file, and I can just show it here in Finder. And I've done a few before, that's why you can see there are many of them. But if I move into the folder here, this particular file called MySql connector Java, and then whatever version, doesn't really matter, and then .jar, that's actually the file you need to use. So if you copy it, you can just say copy. Then you need, if you create a web app, I mean, if this wasn't a web app, if it was just like a regular Java application, you would just go into IntelliJ, and then you would go to project structure, and then you would go to libraries, and then you would include this connector file. You would include it into your Java project. But since this is a web app, the Tomcat application server is actually where the application is run. So what you need to do here is actually to go to the now this is a Mac. If it was on a Windows machine, you would go to the program files folder and then find the Apache folder where the Tomcat server is located, and then go to the lib folder, and then you just drop this jar file into the lib folder. That's all you need to do. Just drop the jar file into that file, and then you have your connector up and running. So so I'll assume that you have done that, and then I will continue back into developing or implementing the changes so I can communicate with the database. So the first thing was to get the connector installed. Next thing is that I want to go to my source file, and then I'll say new. I'll create a package, and I'll call it data layer. That's it. And in the data layer, I want to create a new Java class, and I think I'll just call it database user. Do I want to add it to Git? I can do it later. Okay, so this is my file, and so in this class I wanna have a method that I want to have a public method, and I think I want to return it. I just want to return a boolean, and I want it called is valid user login, and I want to have two parameters, one called username and a string called user password. Okay, so this is my method, and so the idea is that that from the application layer, I want to call this particular function that communicates from the data layer with the database, and then I want to call this valid user login. I give the username, the user password, and then I just want to execute an SQL statement. So I want to check whether or not this user with that particular password exists in the database. And now in order to communicate, this is a little bit tricky, but in order to communicate with the database, I need a lot of code that I just need to paste in because it's a lot to write, and so I'll just paste in a few things just to make it a little bit quicker. The first thing I want to paste in is this, and this is a few constants, and this one here I need to put in the name of the schema that I created in here, and the name of my schema was web app tutorial. So I could actually just copy it from here, then I will do it right. So this is the name of my database, or my schema in MySql, and the URL to it, and then there's a username, and the username that I created was the one that I did here. Remember, it was called the web app user. So I type in web app user, and the password was test123. So this particular user, through this I can get access to my schema called web app tutorial, and as you probably can remember, I only gave myself access to this schema, and also I only gave myself the privileges to select from this very schema here, just in case. And so these 4 lines here I need in order to set up and prepare for the access for the database. And then there's a few more things that I want to paste in. First, in the top here, I wanna create a few variables. One I will call is valid user, and I want to set it to false. And then in the very end, at the very end of this method, of course, I want to return is valid user. I want to return that as the final result. So my idea is that in the middle here, I want to make a lookup in the database with this particular username and password. And if one such row exists, I want to return true down here. So then I want to change this variable if it exists. Otherwise, by default, it will return false. So I set it to false here. So this is just to get started and to give you an idea of how I want to do this. Now it gets a little bit messy. I'm just going to paste in a lot of code here, and then I'll walk you through it. And the first thing, I just have 3 variables that I need. One is for setting up the connection string to the database. Another one is when I want to fire an SQL statement, I want to do it through this particular object. And then I have a string. It's just a regular string where I want to type in my SQL statement. And then I'm going to pack the whole thing, wrap it into a try catch or several catches, because when you are programming against the database, there are several things that can go wrong. So you want to catch the different exceptions and print it out or save them for debugging purposes. And this is all handled by this code here. So and then the first thing is here, register the JDBC driver is being done here. Then you open up a connection, and I just do a few print lines saying connecting to database. So then when you're debugging, if something goes wrong, it's easier to find the place where things go wrong. Then I set up the connection here with my DB URL and user and password that I created up here, and then I want to create my SQL statement, and my SQL statement is a select star from users, where username equals, and then my username that I have here from this first parameter, and user password equals, and then the user password from up here. So this is my SQL statement, and this is for now it's just a string. And you might wonder why these backslash are here, and that's because I need to have some double quotation marks wrapped around the username and the password. And since any string starts with a double quotation here, I need to escape it by a backslash, and then you can type the double quote here, and then it's being interpreted as just a double quote within a quote. So it might look a little bit complicated, but once you get used to it, it all makes sense. Then I have printed out my SQL statement, just also for debugging purposes. And now here, this is important. This is where my SQL statement actually gets executed. So this is my string, and then from this statement I say execute query, and then my SQL statement is being executed, and the result is being returned into a result set that I can loop through it, or I can do various operations on this result set afterwards. And all I'm doing is actually to say I'm just trying to move to the first row in the result set, and if it exists, then my valid login result, which is actually this one here, it's called is valid user up here. I put it to true, and then that's it. And then I start closing my result set. I close the statement object and I close the connection object, and then the rest here is just exception handling. And in the very end, I return is valid user. So this is it. This should actually be able to do the job. Before I can make this work, I need to go into my user, in the application layer, into the user class, and as you remember, this is where I validated the user credentials, and this one of course needs to be changed. So I just delete it, and all I need to do now is to use my newly created user class, and let's just call this db user object, and then I make a new instance of it like this. And now I can actually instead of returning false here, I just say return, and I just want to return if I say db user object dot is valid user login, I just need to take the username and the user password as parameters, and that's it. This is where my validation is being carried out. And so this one here calls the method that I created down here, which returns a boolean. Either my user credentials are valid or they are not valid, true or false, and it's being returned here. So it was just a minor change that I needed to do in this at the application layer level, but now I'm pulling from the database layer. Now let's try it out. So I'm actually gonna redeploy my application. Oh, I just realized that I needed to import java.sql.star. Now I'm gonna try again. Okay, so let's go to my GSP page, and I actually have the same login name and password, which is test123, and I'm gonna try again, and it says, dear Jon, your password is, but how can I know whether it's true or not that that it's pulling from the database? So I'll go back to the workbench, and then I will take my users, let's just call it test, and that's it. I'm gonna apply, so that's it. So now I have changed the user password. So if I go back here, I reload the page, and I still keep test123, it's invalid login and password, try again, and I type test 1 2 3 and I log in. So now I just want to say test, and now it works. So this should prove that that the system is working, and that it's actually pulling from the database now. As the last thing, if you look down here at the bottom here, you can see the different print lines that I printed out, like connecting to database. And here you see the SQL statement, what it looks like. And then the last one I tried out was this with password equals test. So this is a small trace of what I did down here. A small note maybe is that this way of communicating with a database is, I would say, one of the simplest ways of doing it. But there are different frameworks you can use, and other ways of communicating with MySQL. And I think that this one is vulnerable to what is called SQL injections. And there are another way of creating these result sets that are more safe, but it's slightly more complicated. So I have left it out for this first web app tutorial. And I think later on I'm going to create a tutorial where I try to speak a little bit about how you can make it a more safe implementation, so you don't make yourself vulnerable to SQL injections and stuff like that. So thank you for now, and good luck.